The scripture reading this morning is Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Jeremiah 1, verse 5. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations.
Good morning. It's good to see you, and it's good to be together. Thankful that you are here. Thankful that you've made a point to be here when the world gives us so many other opportunities of things that you can be doing. So thank you for making a point to be here. I want you to bookmark what Russ just read for us, Jeremiah chapter 1 and verse 5, and we'll come back to that later on in the lesson. The theme this month is overcoming adversity, or this year. And this month, what we're going to be looking at is different times of adversity in the Bible. And I can't think of a more adverse time in the Bible than what we're going to be looking at this morning. You know, the adversity that we see the Israelites facing in Exodus chapter 1 and in Exodus chapter 2. And that's where we're going to start. And then we see again the Israelites in Matthew chapter 2 and an extreme case of adversity. I don't know why I'm rubbing my hands together all the time like this. Starting a fire, getting cold, I don't know. Nerves, I guess. Let's look at Exodus chapter 2. And as we think about this, I want you to have this image in your mind about Joseph and everything that Joseph had done for the nation of Egypt. And how he allowed them to survive, and not just survive, but to thrive in times of difficulty, right? It was seven good years, you remember, and then there were 7 bad years, you remember, and he stored up all those crops and grains that allowed the Pharaoh really to be one of the most powerful people in the entire world. And that's really, essentially, all because of Joseph. But we see Pharaoh, and Pharaoh here is a different Pharaoh than the one that Joseph interacted with. And let's read, in this, we're going to read a passage here, verse 8 and verse 9, and this is going to set up for us the context in which the rest of chapter 1 and chapter 2, or the first half of chapter 2, is set up for us. Now there arose a new king, a new Pharaoh, over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And at verse 9, he said to the people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. So that essentially is setting up the context of what we're about to look at, this adverse time. Not just were they slaves, becoming slaves in the land of Egypt, but it gets much worse than that, doesn't it? It gets pretty gruesome here. The Israelites were too mighty and too powerful, and they were afraid. It was because of fear, in my estimation, that motivated this Pharaoh to do what we see in the coming verses. Look at what he tells these midwives in verse 15 and verse 16. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah. And verse 16, when you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, look at it, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. Can you imagine the order from the king to tell these midwives, hey, If it's a boy, if you see it's a boy, I want you to kill him. You talk about some adversity. I can't imagine. Well, the story continues. They didn't do that because they feared God, and we'll look at that in a minute. But look at what he did. Because they didn't do that, we see in verse 22, then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. So the command goes from just the midwives, and now it goes to, as it says here, to all the people. Hey, if you see the Hebrews having a son, you go ahead and get rid of him. Can you imagine? I mean, it's just terrible, isn't it? It's just awful. Well, thankfully, what we see is in the midst of incredible adversity, we see obedience. And through this adversity, these midwives and everyone we see in verse 22 was obedient to God. Look at what it says here in verse 17 very quickly. But the midwives, look at this, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. You see, the midwives understood that they served a higher power than the king of Egypt. The king of Egypt can tell us to do whatever he wants to tell us to do. But if it contradicts what God tells us to do, we are obedient to God rather than man. Doesn't that sound familiar? Not only were they obedient through adversity, but because of their obedience, they were blessed. If you continue reading in verse 20, look at this. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong, right? The king of Egypt tried to kill, right? Tried to diminish the Hebrews. He tried to get rid of them, especially the male children. But the exact opposite happened. They grew strong. And not just that, the midwives themselves, were dealt well by God. I mean, God took care of them and He gave them families themselves in verse 21. So all the way through this adversity, they were obedient, and because of their obedience to the higher power rather than God, they were blessed. And ultimately, what comes out of this story is deliverance. I mean, because you see as the story continues to unfold, we have a particular woman, Moses' mother. And she cast her son into the Nile like she was supposed to. But there was one small catch. She put him in I guess, what would be a little boat. And gave him a little push. And then, you understand, the providence of God in a story like this where you have extreme adversity. Do you think the mother of Moses would have ever put him in that little boat and shoved him into the Nile if there wasn't this edict from the king? I mean, if the king didn't say, get rid of all your sons, do you think she would have ever put him there? And if she never put him there, do you think Pharaoh's daughter would have come along? And if Moses hadn't been raised by Pharaoh's daughter in the house of Pharaoh himself, do you think that he would have Pharaoh's ear to come and stand in front of him and to say, you know what? Let my people go, thus says the Lord. Let my people go. And stand to live the tale? I mean, can you imagine the providence of God? Even through all this adversity, we see God working. It gives me chills. I got goosebumps just thinking about it. God works even through extreme adversity, even through some of the most dire situations in the entire world, especially then. Well, let's flip over to Matthew chapter 2 very quickly. And in Matthew chapter 2, it's almost an echo of what we see. We see it's not Pharaoh, but now it's King Herod. King Herod is in control here at this particular junction. and all things are going well. Until one day, he gets a visit from a few men. We don't necessarily know how many. But read with me, and this is going to set up what we're about to talk about in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, here's his visit, and this is what they said, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Now, there's one little problem here, and this is why Herod was troubled, because he didn't have a son that was born. And these wise men come and they say, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Now, logically, if you are the wise men, where are you going to look for the king? Marching up to the palace, right? Where is the king? We've come to worship him. Where is this guy? But Herod was like, what? What are you talking about? Obviously, if Herod heard this, he would be, as verse 3 says, very troubled, and all of Israel with him. Can you imagine, what he was thinking? Well, the story continues to unfold, and I believe it's the jealousy of Herod that motivates him to do the events that ensue. The jealousy of Herod is atrocious. But for instance, hang with me here and look at verse 8. We see Herod's deception, right? Look at verse 8 with me. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. Now, do you honestly think that Herod was going to go worship this little boy, the one that was supposedly to take over his throne? Nah, I don't think so. All right, listen, Herod, if you don't know where the next king is, I ain't about to tell you, right? Well, thankfully, the angel came and told the wise men, hey, don't go back to Herod. Go back home. But because of that, because they deceived Herod, we see his rage. Look at how angry he was. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And look at this. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all the region who were, 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. 2 years old. Can you imagine this little 2-year-old? Amos just turned 3. This little 2-year-old being killed, being ripped from mama and daddy, and being slaughtered because he was so jealous and so angry. He decided, you know what? I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to kill all the little boys in this region. You talk about adversity. You talk about difficult times. How sad. It's one thing as you're giving birth to this child to have that child taken from you. It's another thing to have that child taken from you after 2 years of loving on this little boy. He tried to get away with it. And for a while, he thought he did in verse 19, because we see that it was false hope. He had false hope that, hey, the problem has been taken care of, because in verse 19, he died. And as far as he knew what he did in killing all these little baby boys, he had taken care of the problem because he was still king when he died. He thought that this new king, he's gone. He's taken care of. He's not going to take my place. But let me tell you, God's got a plan. And you cannot thwart the plan of God. No matter how hard you try, God's plan is going to prevail. Again, kind of bridging the gap between these two stories that we read about in Exodus chapter 1 and here in Matthew chapter 2. We see the obedience of these men and what they did. Let's read verse 12. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. I mean, they were obedient, and because of their obedience, they were delivered from Herod. Can you imagine what would have happened if Herod got a hold of these fellas? That the ones that say, hey, where's the king? And then, they scurried on their way, deceiving him. I think he would probably kill him there on the spot. Maybe even killed him himself. But they were delivered because of their obedience. We see their deliverance. But ultimately, the whole story in Matthew chapter 2 is about our deliverance, isn't it? Our deliverer being born. And because of this, because God's providence and God's care and everything that God did, we can be delivered from our sins through Jesus who was born, the King of the Jews. So that was, those are bad times. Can't imagine. It's nothing like that would ever happen today, would it? Let's talk about America. At the risk of getting political, and at the risk of some of you stoning me, folks, we got a problem, don't we? We can look back in Exodus chapter 1 and say, that is awful. Can you imagine? And we can go to Matthew chapter 2 and say, how could they? But we better take a long, hard look at ourselves. This is where Jeremiah chapter 1 and verse 5 comes into play. Because here in this particular text, look at what God says to Jeremiah. Now the word of the Lord, behold, it's on the screen. Now the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And not just that, I had a plan for you. Even when you were in the womb, I consecrated you and appointed you a prophet. That's a person there in the womb. And you will never be able to convince me otherwise. Look at another passage in Job chapter 31 and verse 35. Some wisdom, I suppose, coming from Job here in verse 15. He says, did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? So we see that God creates humans in the womb. Another passage, a few pages over, Psalm chapter 22. Look at it. Look at verse 10. On you was I cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. You can't tell me that that's not a little person in the womb. 139, verse 13 and verse 14. For you formed my inward parts and knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am fearfully and wonderfully made in my mama's belly. Now, I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think Pharaoh did what he did because he was afraid of what the Hebrews could do. And I think Herod did what he did because he was jealous and maybe a little scared of what would happen, I mean, this new king that's been born. What are we doing? What's our reasoning? Why? What justification could we possibly give? Well, lucky for you, I looked it up. Top 3 reasons for abortion. The first one, negative impact on mother's life. And specifically, we're talking about mother's life in relation to school or a job. For instance, if mama wants to continue climbing the corporate ladder, just get rid of that little baby. Or if mama wants to continue in the school that she's doing, enrolled in, just get rid of that little baby. Second reason, mama gets rid of that little baby because of financial instability. She doesn't want to have that little kid because she doesn't think that she's financially capable of having that little kid. Understandable. Third reason, top 3, mama has abortion is because she's afraid of being a single mama. There they are. Top 3 reasons for abortion. Among those who listed it, and not everybody listed it, but there it is. Let me tell you, having an abortion because you want to continue working in the same way that you are working, I don't know that it gets any more selfish than that. I mean, I'm struck. I don't know what to say. You could possibly be that selfish that you want to keep working in the same capacity that you have been, that you're willing to sacrifice a life of your child. I don't get it. Or financial instability. You sacrifice your child, you abort your child because of financial instability. Let me tell you something. You can get over that. Right? I mean, if you're going to be a parent, you're going to be broke. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're spending a lot of money on that little baby. You can get over that. But doesn't that, I mean, all joking aside, doesn't that, the financial instability, doesn't that speak to a lack of faith in God? I mean, do you not think that God can take care of you? Do you not think that God is going to provide for you and whatever? I mean, we don't know. But isn't that what the second half of Matthew chapter 6 is all about when Jesus says, look at the lilies of the field. You're not more beautiful than a lily of the field. Look at the birds in the air. God takes care of them. And do you not think that God cares about you? That one just points to a lack of faith. And the third one, you're worried about being a single mama. I can understand. But the solution is, let's fix the family. The household that God created consists of a mama and a daddy. We fix the family. Number 3 is taken care of. Maybe you're not married yet. You take premarital sex out of the equation. You take sexual immorality out of it. You take sin out of it. 1, 2, and 3 are all fixed. I think, in thinking about those and this week, I can't help but to think about Mary. If there is a woman that fit every description as to why I should have an abortion in America, this was it. A negative impact on her life. You remember Joseph, in his mind, he resolved to put her away quietly. You want to talk about a negative impact? And now she's pregnant, she has no husband. What do you think the world is thinking? You talk about a negative impact. She's living the rest of her life, look at it, as a single mama. If, that's what she chooses. Joseph chooses. And, financial instability? What does she have? She doesn't have a husband. No one's taking care of her. No one's providing for her. She's leaving her parents' house. She is getting engaged. She's getting married. She's engaged to this man, and now he is resolved to put her away, but put her away quietly. She's got nothing. If there was a woman in biblical history that should have resolved to put her child away, to abort that baby, it is this woman. But you remember, she has this conversation with the angel, and I know, right? But you remember what she said in response there in Luke chapter 1 and verse 38? Behold, I am a servant of the Lord. Do you not think that God can use us? Do you not think that even through adverse situations that God can use us? Whatever it is. You don't want that child for whatever reason. Do you not think that God can use you? Do you not think that God can use that child? What if Mary had aborted her little boy? She had reason to. If we are obedient to God, through adversity, if we are obedient to God, then there's a blessing that's going to happen from it. I promise you. And ultimately, there's going to be this deliverance if we are faithful to God, if we are obedient. We're going to be delivered from this life and from its troubles and all of its turmoil. We're going to be taken care of. Now, I know, and I'll get persecuted and flack for not saying it. I know that there are 1,000 other reasons why people get abortion. I believe it was incest was 3%. Rape was 1%. The top three, 73%, 74%, and 60-something% were on the screen. God can use us through adversity.